The Curse of Crimson Hollow. I never believed in curses. Growing up, I was always the one to laugh off superstitions and brush off any mention of the supernatural. But that all changed when I moved to the small town of Crimson Hollow. The first time I heard about the curse, I was sitting in the local diner, enjoying a cup of coffee and chatting with the friendly waitress. She told me about the legend of Crimson Hollow, a curse that had plagued the town for generations. It was said that the land was cursed by a witch who was burned at the stake by the townspeople. And every year, on the anniversary of her death, strange things would happen in Crimson Hollow. I laughed it off, thinking it was just a silly story to entertain tourists. But as the months went by, I started to notice strange occurrences. People would go missing, only to reappear weeks later with no memory of what happened to them. Others would claim to see a figure in a red cloak wandering the streets at night. And there were rumors of a mysterious illness that had been spreading throughout the town. I tried to ignore it all, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong in Crimson Hollow. And then one night, I had a terrifying encounter that changed everything. I was walking home from the diner, the streets empty and quiet. As I turned the corner onto my street, I saw her, the woman in the red cloak. She was standing in the middle of the road, her face hidden by the hood of her cloak. I froze, not sure what to do. But then she lifted her head and I saw her face, or what was left of it. Her skin was charred and her eyes were glowing red. I screamed and ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. When I finally reached my house, I locked the door and collapsed onto the floor, trying to catch my breath. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. Was it real, or was it all in my head? But the next morning, when I woke up, I found a mark on my arm, a symbol that looked like it had been branded onto my skin. I was terrified, but I didn't know who to turn to. The townspeople had warned me about the curse, but I never believed them. Now, I was starting to think that they were right. As the days went by, I started to experience more and more strange things. I would wake up in the middle of the night to find my furniture rearranged or my belongings missing. And every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the woman in the red cloak standing behind me, her eyes burning into mine. I knew I had to find a way to break the curse. I did some research and found out about the witch who had been burned at the stake. Her name was Abigail, and she was said to have cursed the town as she died. The only way to break the curse was to find her remains and give her a proper burial. It was a long shot, but I was desperate. I searched through old records and maps, trying to find the location of Abigail's grave. And finally, after weeks of searching, I found it in an old, abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of town. With a shovel in hand, I made my way to the cemetery at midnight, the only time when the curse was said to be at its weakest. As I dug up the grave, I could feel a presence watching me. But I didn't stop until I found the skeleton of a woman in a red cloak. I gave her a proper burial and prayed that it would be enough to break the curse. And as I walked back to my house, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The next morning, the town of Crimson Hollow was back to normal. The mysterious illness disappeared, people stopped going missing, and the woman in the red cloak was never seen again. I never told anyone about what happened that night. I didn't want to be seen as crazy or superstitious. But deep down, I knew that the curse of Crimson Hollow was real, and I would never forget the terror that I experienced in that small town. Nightmares in the attic. I never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural. I always thought they were just stories that people made up to scare others. That was until I moved into my new house with my family. The house was big and old, but it had a charm to it. It had a large attic that was filled with old boxes and furniture. My parents told me that I could use the attic as my own personal space, and I was excited to have a place to call my own. But as soon as I stepped foot in the attic, I felt a strange presence. It was like someone was watching me, but I brushed it off as my imagination. I started unpacking my things and setting up my room. That's when I found an old photo album hidden behind a box. I opened the album and saw pictures of a family that I didn't recognize. They looked happy, but there was something off about the pictures. The family had a dark aura around them, and their eyes seemed to follow me wherever I went. That night, I had my first nightmare. I dreamt of a little girl standing at the end of my bed, staring at me with her empty eyes. She whispered my name over and over again, and I woke up in a cold sweat. I tried to shake off the dream and went back to sleep, but the nightmares continued every night. I started to avoid going to the attic, but my parents noticed and asked me about it. I didn't want to tell them about the nightmares, so I just said that the attic gave me a creepy feeling. My parents laughed it off and said it was just an old house. But things started to get worse. I would wake up with scratches on my arms and bruises on my legs. I couldn't explain it, and my parents didn't believe me when I told them that something was in the attic. They thought I was just trying to get out of sleeping in my room. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront whatever was in the attic. I climbed up the stairs and slowly opened the door. The attic was dark and quiet, but I could feel a strong presence. I walked further into the room and saw the little girl from my nightmares standing in front of me. I froze in fear as she spoke. "You shouldn't have come up here. This is my attic, and you're not welcome here." I tried to run, but I couldn't move. The little girl's eyes turned red, and she let out a blood-curdling scream. Suddenly, the boxes and furniture started to move, and I realized that there were more spirits in the attic. They were all angry and vengeful, and they blamed me for disturbing their peace. I screamed for help, and my parents came running up the stairs. As soon as they opened the door, the spirits disappeared, and the attic was back to normal. My parents didn't believe me when I told them what happened. They thought it was just a nightmare, but I knew the truth. I had awoken something in the attic, and it was not going to let me leave without a fight. From that day on, I never stepped foot in the attic again. I learned to live with the nightmares, but I always felt like I was being watched. I realized too late that the house had a dark past, and the spirits that lived in the attic were not going to rest until they had their echoes of Ravenswood. I never believed in ghosts. I scoffed at the idea of spirits haunting old houses and cemeteries. But that all changed when I moved into Ravenswood, the old Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town. The first time I saw the house, I was immediately drawn to its grandeur. It stood tall and proud, its dark walls adorned with intricate carvings and a tower that reached towards the sky. It was said to have been built in the 1800s by a wealthy family who mysteriously disappeared one night, leaving the house abandoned ever since. Despite the rumors and warnings from the locals, I couldn't resist the allure of the house. I was in need of a change, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. So, I bought the house and moved in, eager to start a new chapter in my life. First, everything seemed normal, but as the days went by, strange things began to happen. I would hear faint whispers and footsteps in the empty halls, but I brushed it off as my imagination. That was until I saw her. She appeared to me one night, a ghostly figure dressed in a white dress with long dark hair covering her face. She stood at the foot of my bed, her eyes fixed on me. I screamed and turned on the light, but she was gone. I told myself it was just a nightmare, but the feeling of her presence lingered. From then on, the house seemed to come alive at night. Doors would slam shut, objects would move on their own, and I would hear the distinct sound of ravens cawing. But the most unsettling of all was the ghostly echoes of a party that would fill the house at midnight. The sounds of laughter, music, and glasses clinking, as if the party from the 1800s was still going on. I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to leave Ravenswood, but every time I tried to leave, I would find myself back in the house. It was as if the house didn't want me to leave. I was trapped in a nightmare. One day, I decided to do some research on the house. I discovered that the wealthy family who had lived here had a daughter named Amelia, who had gone missing the night they disappeared. It was believed that she had run away with a lover, but her body was never found. Could it be her ghost that haunted the house? Determined to put her spirit to rest, I searched the house for any clues. That's when I found a hidden room in the tower. Inside, I found a diary belonging to Amelia. As I read through it, I learned the truth. She had been in love with a stable boy, but her family had forbidden their relationship. Desperate to be together, they had planned to run away that fateful night. But their plan was discovered and Amelia was locked in the hidden room, never to be seen again. Filled with guilt and sadness, I knew I had to help her. I gathered all her belongings and buried them in the garden, hoping it would bring her peace. And finally, the house fell silent. I never saw Amelia's ghost again, and I could finally leave Ravenswood. But the memories of that haunted house still remain with me. I now believe in ghosts, and I have a newfound respect for the spirits that may still roam among us. As for Ravenswood, it remains abandoned, a reminder of the tragic past and the ghostly echoes that still linger.